My name is Wayne. I'm the director of AIVRS. I've been in this position since the beginning of this grant cycle. We're in year 4, starting year 5 in October. So that's a fun time for all of us. And we're just here to help present information to y'all. Rebecca?
Hello, everyone. I know some of you are in the afternoon, so I won't say good morning. Rebecca Holland. I'm an AIVRS VR coordinator. I've been doing this particular role for 3 years, and I have over 30 years experience in tribal VR, state VR, and veterans VR and E. So really glad to be here and present today.
So the outcomes that we are hoping to get from this is that you're going to be able to recognize the importance of submitted timely and complete annual and final performance reports. We're going to hopefully get the opportunity to explore and see where we can find this data to create deeper insights into your performance reports to drive meaningful change and improve that participant outcome. So really utilizing this data to impact your performance and provide more meaningful services. And the last one is we're hoping that you're going to be able to learn what project data means and how to use that data in your report writing and also as a piece of your project evaluation. Now, one of the unspoken things here that underlies with the project evaluation piece is that this can also be used as part of your grant writing process, which is very important. And we'll get into that more as we go along. Okay, so what does this mean? Evaluating our impact beyond the numbers. Okay, so something I want everybody to kind of step back for a minute, even if you're new, and just kind of think about what you bring to the table. In your community, you are the expert. You know your culture, you know your community, you know your traditions, and embracing that understanding is very important when we look at the mission of AIVRS projects or TVR projects. You're going to hear me use AIVRS and TVR interchangeably throughout the presentation. People have tried to get me on a one track, and I can't seem to stick. I bounce all over. So when we talk about the mission of Tribal VR, we're really expanding on that cultural component. Right? The mission is to serve our tribal members with disabilities in a culturally responsive way. So meaning that we take into account all of those needs of our people in our communities, because the state VR doesn't do that very well. The challenge is the amount of paper that is created and the numbers that come for the mandatory federal reporting and the project impact. Now, when we're working with an individual, we don't take that into mind. We're focused on serving that participant, helping them better their situation and improve their quality of life and all that stuff, rather than thinking about, okay, this number is going to help me with my reporting. This number is going to help me, get my next grant numbers approved. All of that stuff. We don't think about that, and that's okay, because really, while our staff need to have that in the back of their minds, it really does fall on that director or project manager to have their brain wrapped around what are we doing and how are we moving forward. So the opportunity that we're going to see is how we can transform the data from a reporting requirement into this really cool, powerful tool for strategic decision making. One of the things that AIVRS has really been pushing and supporting projects and moving forward with is the culturally appropriate service model. Now, this is very unique to only tribal VR projects, and at the end of our intensive technical assistance services, Lee comes into the picture, and he does some questions and helps people in the project understand the value of that cultural and traditional impact. And from that, these projects have been developing culturally appropriate service models. That is huge when we look at the opportunity for that decision-making process, taking our culture into it and helping us develop a performance management plan that addresses the needs of our people while addressing the needs of the mandatory reporting. Okay, so the focus. Data mining can provide deeper insights from your performance report. All right, so this is where we sit down and look at all that information that's compiled and put together, and then we have the rubber meet the road, right? So we sit down and look at how our reporting, what we're doing right, where we need improvement, and then how does that improve our services to our people so that then they obtain successful employment more readily, and we see that quality of life improvement across all of our communities. So it's really, there's a huge impact way beyond just getting our numbers. And again, I can't put enough emphasis on this. The cultural responsiveness, appropriate cultural responsiveness in service provision is what sets us apart from state VR. We have a very similar VR process. We call it the TVR journey. We're in the final stages of getting that all put together so that we're going to be rolling that document out soon for everybody to look at. It'll be on our website. It captures the cultural impact across all of the VR process. That's why we call it the TVR journey. It's more of a journey rather than a linear process that we are going to follow. So again, when we're collecting the data, make sure that we look at this and capture what our culture and our traditions mean to us in our communities and how it flavors our work and employment opportunities. Remember that we come from a holistic approach. So subsistence living isn't just a fun little title. Subsistence living is how we've lived our whole life. Everybody has a role. Everybody has responsibilities. And we bring it all together to support our community. And so really as a TVRA project, you guys have that opportunity to create that central piece again and boosting our community's upward growth. Okay, so now all of my passionate speech is just killed by this foundation, by the legal piece, right? The regulations and legislation. In the Rehab Act of 73 as amended, Section 121 authorized the grants for AIVRS projects. And without this being in place and the work of the Navajo Nation and getting us the advocacy to move forward, again, they're celebrating their 50th year this year. So that's an awesome accomplishment. We wouldn't have this opportunity. And so the Code of Federal Regulations that we use, that were developed, originally we were part of the 361 and we had just a little blurb in it, but they decided they decided that it didn't have the impact and the guidance and the governance as needed. So they created Section 34, Part 371, and this specifically is for the AIVRS programs to govern the process and the implementation of this grant. We also look at 34 CFR Part 200. This is the fiscal side of it, the making sure that we have all of the match requirements and all the stuff you see on the screen right now. So those two regulations are governing, okay? The 361 specifically governs the state VR programs. Now, because it has such a detailed definition of the different components required for the IPE, for eligibility, for service provision, it's been approved that we can use 361 for guidance purposes in developing the IPE components and developing service provision and policy and procedure and all that. However, it's only guidance. We don't use that as govern. That's the 371. Okay. The challenge, navigating data, right? That's a fun title, isn't it? So what does that really what does it tie down to? I mean, what does it come to is that we collect a large amount of data, and sometimes we don't know how to do that. There's projects that are still utilizing Excel spreadsheets that they've developed themselves. There's some projects that we know of that are doing handwritten, paper and pen tracking. All those things are okay. We also have programs or projects that are using software and database systems to collect this data that then is generated into a report. The key reports that we have to look at are our annual performance reports. As it says in the title, annual means yearly, right? Every year we have to complete a report, except your first year of grant funding. In your first year, you have to do a 6-month report and then another annual report in that first year. The 4 years after that, or 3 years after that, you have to complete a annual report. And then in your 5th year, you have to do your final report. Now, originally, that was a standalone. You had your 5th year annual report and your 5th year final performance report, which is a cumulative report of all the grant activity. RSA has now combined that into your final performance report into your 5th year annual performance report. So it's one report. It's just a section that you identify in that report now for 5th year data instead of having to do 2 separate reports. What we look for in the APR, there's some key components. We have employment outcomes, so we want to make sure that we're meeting our projected numbers. We have financial expenditures, so we want to make sure that we are meeting all the federal and non-federal funds and utilizing it appropriately. So that's where we look at large available balances and all those fun things and how that impact or is impacted by, cultural or environmental or disaster type situations.
Okay. No, I didn't. Thanks for
So the other thing we look at is measurement of project goals, objectives, and activities. This is something that we have to pull and make sure that we're meeting those numbers. And then we have to complete an executive summary. Now, the executive summary is a great opportunity for you to provide the opportunity for success stories and to also identify struggles or barriers to those successes. Okay. Now, when I was learning how to write these reports, I was provided this opportunity for a sandwich, right? So that means you have your bread, you have bad news in the middle, and then you have your good news at the end. So you start out explaining some really good things you're doing. You talk about some of the struggles you have in the middle, and then you end up with another positive success story, or you talk about accomplishments the project's made. In your 5-year report, we really start to hone in, because at the 5th year, we're looking at performance-based numbers and making sure that we've met everything over the 5 years, because now we're getting ready to write for another proposal. And so we got to justify that we've been doing a good job in the last 5 years, that you should continue to fund our project. So we're looking at grant funding and the match contributions. Did you use your money effectively? Did your tribe, did it do in kind, or did you do a monetary match? Was that used appropriately? Your use of carryover funds, did you have carryover? And if you did have carryover, were you able to expend all that money? Completion of all your project goals and objectives, and then your final employment outcome for your participants. These are all the key components in that final report to start developing that justification for the next proposal. And always remember that these numbers don't always reveal the deeper story behind the numbers. So it's important to really expand in that executive summary that is required in both the 5-year and the annual performance report. All right. So again, I kind of mix these 2 slides together just because that's kind of what I like to do, I guess. The details of federal reporting. Again, the APR is submitted annually to the rehab Service Administration, or RSA. We used to do it through, I can't remember it's off the top of my head. I can't remember the name of that software. Now we're doing it through G5. So that's a nice quick connection there. One of the things, just like when we are working with a participant, when we have an IPE and we want to make sure that we're experiencing substantial progress towards employment, right? When RSA looks at our reports, what they are looking at is the substantial progress to determine if they're going to continue to fund us or not. So it's important that we make sure that that's documented and showed in there that we're making substantial progress. And again, the key components, we're looking at budget narrative. How are we spending the money? And the way we identified that money, is it being spent appropriately? So it's the narrative and the expenditures. We want to see an update on progress towards project goals and objectives. So making sure that you're identifying each step and forward movement with that. Making sure we're meeting our numbers of the individuals served under an IPE. Remember, there's two main performance categories that we look at, and that's numbers served under an IPE and number of successful outcomes achieved that year. And then there's some auxiliary information collected as far as like education plans and that type of stuff. But that's those two are really looking at the employment and are we getting the numbers served under IPEs. And then that executive summary is so important because that's where we tell our story and get that information. Again, the numbers are cold, they aren't embracing, and that's where you get the opportunity to tell your warm, fuzzy stories. Okay, so the final covers the entire 5-year period like we talked about. And this is the comprehensive overview. We want to make sure you identify impact, outcomes, and the lessons learned that guide you in moving forward in the next proposal. So you can start to see how this, while it's an evaluation and a performance measure, you're also able to use this to start guiding your process in the next cycle of proposal writing. Okay. Key components, again, the grant funding, are you using your match, all that correctly? Is it in kind? Is it a monetary match? Carryover funds. I'm going to tell you guys right now, one of the biggest issues we have is large available balances across 90% of our AIVRS projects. And the issue with that is that Congress looks at that and says, well, they're not using their money. So why do we continue to fund at this level if they're not using all their money and they're turning it back to the Treasury? Now the state gets to reallot their funds. So if they don't use all their funds or they don't have matching, they can do a reallotment, and then other states can request that money. And the AIVRS projects aren't allowed to do that. So our money just goes back to the Treasury. We lose it. So it's really important that we look at this reporting to get that data and those numbers to make sure that we are capturing all of the funds and available services that we can. Timeliness matters as well. Okay, so when we're looking at that, reporting is a mandatory compliance, and if you fail to do this, you can jeopardize your continuation awards. And if we're doing final performances, you can actually put your grant proposal at jeopardy. Second, the reports are the primary source of data. So you just heard me talking about the large available balances. This is where our federal funders and the stakeholders, Congress, see whether we're effectively utilizing this fund to provide services or not. So it's really important that we get this information out to all the people that are key in making those decisions. And then finally, it's the data-driven insights. So are we utilizing what we're learning to grow the project, to improve our service provision, our timeliness, is our impact big and expanding? All those things come into play in that last one.
Wayne, should there be any hold back, like if we put something, because we have to use a software, a database, we have to put in all our procurements and stuff. And if it's not going through, and then we just end up pulling it back and then try to push it through again. So those funds, even they haven't been, like, finance hasn't able to grab a hold of them because they're just sitting in a queue. Will that still would we still be able to use those funds even after September 30th? Because they're
That's a
still
great,
in that queue? And
that's
we
a
still,
great question. And really, so that what I'm hearing is like two separate parts to this. One is in our cuff account, which we should all as directors be doing to manage our budget to see where we're at, is different than what the tribal finance has because they're doing the drawdowns and doing the overall budgeting, right? And so what happens is we have this breakdown. We submit POs or requests, and then we it gets lost in the tribal shuffle. Okay. So in that situation, what I would do is I would show the encumbered amount and take that into your cuff account and show your program officer that, look, these are encumbered. And when you do that, you would be doing it as part of your carryover planning documentation, which is all on the AIVRTAG website. But you would identify this is encumbered. We haven't paid for it yet because we haven't gotten through the whole process, and that's okay. So whatever is encumbered
Okay.
can be paid after 9/30 as long as it's
Okay.
encumbered prior to that date or that deadline. And it has to be incorporated into your planning.
And
Okay.
typically, Vanessa, what, just for clarification, what encumbered means is that you have a purchase order that has,
Right.
has basically connected those dollars to how you're going to use them. And you have until October 30th to be able to expend those funds by, moving it from a PO into actual payment.
Okay.
So that it wouldn't be included in any carryover or anything like that. You have up to 30 days after to be able to take care of those things. So when you're
Okay.
doing it, as Wayne said, your cuff account is critical in making sure that when you are reporting on your budget, you're reporting what is accurate, not necessarily what finance has in place, because they may be lagging behind.
Yeah, it kind of just sits into a queue. We can see it sitting there,
Yep.
and so we probably shouldn't have pulled it back. We should just left it there. So it shows that it was been sitting there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever, and it needs to continue through.
Yeah, if it's got a purchase order, if it has something that is connected to it, it is technically, it's in a place now where it's going to be spent.
Okay.
It isn't necessarily the bottom line, because you may do a purchase order for, let's say, 1,600, and the amount might be $1,563. So then that amount is going to go back into that line item. Okay. But when you've encumbered or put something in a purchase order, you then on your cuff account, on your spreadsheet of following your funds, you would say that is spent. And then it would be up to finance to make sure they've got to close out their books and everything too. And so
Yeah.
by the end of October, that all should be taken care of so that you actually are able to say that carryover, isn't 1,600, it's the, $37 or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
again, following it in your program is really going to be key.
Yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to imply that it was carryover. So if what I meant is in your carryover plan in the forms, you identify what's encumbered.
Yeah.
That's where we're talking about. Yeah, and then 30 days post, like Rebecca explained. So sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Jamie, anything in the box? Nothing in the box. Okay, anybody else have a question? Sweet. Now I get to take a break and Miss Rebecca is going to take over.
Thank you, Wayne. I appreciate the great job you did in talking about reporting, which is critical, critical, critical. And a lot of times when we're doing what we're doing in Tribal VR, as Wayne said in the very beginning, we aren't always thinking about what the information is telling us. We're, working with a client, we're helping them to become employed, self-sufficient, and we aren't thinking about the data. So we do our reporting and we say, yay, that's done. And we don't look at it ever again. And then we lose the opportunity of how that data is revealing information to us. So I'm going to talk about what data mining is. I'm not going to go in depth because I am not in that field, but I am going to talk about some basic things to help you begin to really think about what is the data from my project showing me or showing us, and how can that be used to benefit us? So the first thing in talking about what is data mining is that it's a process of discovering patterns and insights from the data. So we're looking at that information and we're determining, okay, what are the things that look consistent? What are the things this data is teaching me? The second is that it goes beyond simple reporting to find hidden relationships and even predict future trends. Now, we can predict something, but that doesn't guarantee it's going to happen. So if we're looking at our data and we see a whole lot of A plus B equals C, we might be able to predict that for the future. But in the future, quite honestly, it could actually reverse or be different. So we can predict, but it's not a guarantee. And the goal of data mining is to really start to answer some critical questions. Questions like, why are some participants more successful than others? What services have the highest impact on employment outcomes? And who is most at risk for dropping out of the project? I've heard it said over and over that, we begin the VR journey, which is what AIVRS calls it now, not VR process. We begin that VR journey and the participant stays engaged up through IPE development. And then we see after a little bit of time, a drop off in that interaction and that progress. Data mining can really look at who's at the most risk of dropping out of the project. So when we think about data mining in action, and this is really putting feet to the process. Let's talk about an example like predicting employment outcomes. This is where we analyze. Analyze just simply means we look at and figure out. It's not, sometimes we think it needs to be, Megan Donahue, who is our evaluator at AIVRS, who's diving in and, she gets very, very, very detailed. But for someone who isn't that kind of an analysis person, we can still look at employment data from our annual performance report, and we can start to say, what is this telling me? So by looking at the participants' demographics, services received, IPE details, data can really predict the likelihood, again, not guarantee, but the likelihood of that participant achieving a successful employment outcome. And this provides really a powerful evidence-based tool for counselors and directors to use. And remember, Wayne said it great in the first part of this webinar. We don't just use the data for the current grant, we use it also when we're putting together the grant for the next 5 years. And many of you are going to be doing that and submitting your proposals at the beginning of next year. And so that data you've collected can be used as evidence-based information as you're putting your grant together. Now, what does this look like in reality? Well, I want to introduce you to Lena. Lena is a 28-year-old tribal member. She struggles with chronic pain from a past injury. She's interested in weaving, but needs a way to manage her pain while she's working. So the services in the IPE focused on providing Lena with accommodations for her workspace, like an ergonomic chair and a modified loom. Also, there was a connection with an elder who is going to mentor her in culturally traditional weaving techniques. And her goal, her employment goal, is to start a small business, self-employment, selling her weavings at a local cultural center. So when we're looking at working with Lena and then taking that information and working with other participants, we see that in the data mining analysis, the system is going to then analyze Lena's details alongside data that we've received from past consumers or participants. And what it might find or show us is that clients with similar physical challenges who received some of these same services, specialized accommodations, cultural relevant services like a mentorship, and support for self-employment, were 85% more likely to achieve their self-employment business goal and maintain their cultural practice. So this is just an example of a person. It isn't an actual example, but that data mining analysis could show us that information. So the result is that the analysis can confirm that Lena really has a very high likelihood of success. Again, not guaranteeing it. And this prediction really helps us to see that the Tribal VR program can prioritize those culturally relevant services and resources, and there's going to be a high probability for a successful outcome. So this is an example of how data mining can impact our work with our consumers. And I know that we get very busy and we don't often think about going back and looking at data, but it is significant in terms of how it can drive the performance outcomes of what we do. Now, in looking at those performance outcomes, data mining can really be used to make proactive, strategic decisions. And some of the key applications can be really optimizing or making your service delivery the best it can be. So it can identify the most effective and cost-efficient services based on the disabilities that the greatest number and differences in disabilities that you're serving, and also the differences and the similarities in the employment goals that your participants are working towards. Also, it can help with tailoring your IPEs, really to provide a higher probability of success. So tailoring is a great word connected to individualized. That is what makes Tribal VR and VR in general so incredible, is that everything is individualized. So when we are looking at data, we can take some of those services that give that probability of success, but we can still individualize the IPE to make it unique to that person in providing the services, but the way they may be delivered are going to be individual for that person. We can also, a key application is looking at early intervention, identifying potential participants who really are showing risk factors for dropping out of your program. And this can allow counselors to provide targeted support before that person disengages or drops out of the program. It can also, one of the key applications of data mining is that it can make data-driven decisions on where to use limited grant funds to achieve the greatest impact. So I just want to share for a moment here that When I was at the Pueblo of Jemez, I was there for a total of 14 years as the director. And Lee Gashioma was so significant in assisting with collecting data information. He and I did focus groups from people in the community in order to collect information and then to be able to extrapolate or pull that information from what people were saying. But what was fascinating to me is that the Pueblo of Jemez had had a TVR grant since 1996. And I was there, I started there in 1998. And again, 14 years, not straight, but kind of broken up because I was there a couple different times. And I exited in 2020. When I wrote the grant in 2016 and 2011, I didn't have to use national disability information or national, demographic information. Everything I put in the grant was from the data we collected during the time the program was, and still is, at Jemez. And so in addition to collecting that data from our data system, Lee and I also did those focus groups to pull information that really spotlighted our grant. So as we wrote the grant, we infused the data into the grant, but we also were able to take key phrases and statements by people in the community that further impacted the data that we were showing. And it was an incredible, I mean, we got a significantly high score because the reviewers, who often aren't AIVRS, past AIVRS staff or know a lot about TVR, they were drawn in by the comments and the data that was specific to the population we were serving. And so when we're thinking about, data mining and driving your performance outcome, this is really what we're looking at. And you may have software right now that you're using to collect data. That software will have an ad hoc ability to go in and connect and pull just information you're looking for. Some of the data systems has the ability to make graphs and charts showing that data. And again, it can be very, very powerful in presenting that to strategic stakeholders and also your funding agency, which is RSA. So here's just a few techniques. Like seriously, I could have had a whole bunch of slides on data mining techniques, but I just chose the ones that I really felt were going to be the easiest to grasp. So the first data mining technique is called classification. And the goal of this technique is to predict a categorical outcome. So the application of that is to predict if a participant will be successfully employed with an answer of potentially yes or no. Now, again, predict doesn't mean definite. But let's say that we were to look at the population of our participants between the ages of 25 and 35. Based on that age range, just that age range, could we predict if that participant maybe, result in a successful employment outcome just because of age? Is there anything showing that? And that's classification. Clustering has a goal where it groups similar participants together. And the application of that would be something like identify specific participant areas. Young adults needing job training, older adults needing skill updates to develop targeted support strategies. So let's say that with our older adult population, as we're looking at the data, we are recognizing somewhere in the data collection that they have little to no computer skills, and that the majority of them are needing basic computer skills before they ever move into job-related skills. Well, then we would know in order to have successful employment outcome, we need to make sure that group of similar participants have the training on computers they need for success as they move on. The last technique that I'm going to point out is called association rule mining. And this is where we find relationships between different variables. And here's what the application looks like. Discovering which combinations of services most often lead to a successful employment outcome. So you can go into the data and you can look at things like if a person has job coaching plus transportation assistance, how frequently does that lead to a successful employment outcome? Or if a person gets significant counseling and guidance, which should be in every plan that is written, and they also receive child care through, family-related services, does that frequently result in a successful employment outcome? So we can look at the association between those variables to determine are there specific services when paired together have a greater likelihood to help someone? Now, Wayne and I have been talking for a really long time. We want to get ready to move to a group activity we're going to do. I want to summarize by just saying that data mining has benefits. And the first is that you can make data-driven decisions. So you can obtain useful information from data to really guide the next steps for your program. Also, a benefit is enhanced accountability. So you can provide a clearer, more detailed picture of project impact to your stakeholders and your funding agencies. Another benefit is increased project effectiveness. So you can improve participant outcomes and also the efficiency of the service delivery. Sometimes we'll see revolving door clients that are coming back again and again and again. Well, it's not always efficient service delivery if we just start over and do the same thing. What can data mining show us about what might need to happen so that that person doesn't just keep revolving through, but actually moves forward to successful employment outcome and they're able to stay in that? And the final benefit I want to point out is it empowers counselors. And I want to say, in honesty, it empowers your whole TVR staff because it equips your staff with tools to make more informed decisions and really to individualize your services. And so this is critical. Wayne talked about it in terms of performance reporting, which is mandatory. But the second part of this is what you can do to really take a step above where you might have been, to do things differently, to have a greater outcome and performance. Now, with that said, Miles emailed to all of you, and hopefully all of you have it. If you didn't find it in your inbox, look in your spam or junk folder. But he emailed you a
Just
form.
put it in the chat as well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Miles. So it's in the chat. You can download it in the chat. But this is going to lead us into our breakout group activity. So the first thing you're going to see on that form is 2 scenarios. Now, when we put you into breakout rooms, I'm going to tell you which rooms will have scenario 1 and which rooms will have scenario 2. These are 2 typical data mining challenges, okay? And they come from AIVRS case study. In your group, you're going to read your scenario so everybody's on the same page. And then you're going to brainstorm how you would use data mining to understand the problem in the scenario. And I've italicized in the scenario where that question might start to show the problem. So you're going to brainstorm. The second thing you're going to do is consider what data you would need to understand that problem. What data might help you see what's going on? The third thing you're going to do in the group is you're going to ask yourselves, what data mining technique of the three I talked about could I use for this problem to identify what's going on? And then the last thing is, what specific insights do you hope to uncover? All right, now you have all of this on that form that was emailed, or Miles put it in the chat. So right now we have 21 people in the group. And so Miles, what I want to do is I want to break the group into groups of 4. And in your group, again, read the scenario and then be able to talk through those questions that are on that form. And don't get caught up with, I don't know that much about data mining. I came in here, I said none, or just begin to talk about what might work in terms of identifying what you could do in that data mining situation for that problem. And so we're going to have groups of 4. That will be 5 groups. Groups 1 through 3, and you're going to know by the number of your room. Room 1 through 3, you're going to look at scenario number 1. Room 4 and 5, you're going to look at scenario number 2. And so what Miles is going to do, and I'll go ahead and stop screen share right now. What Miles is going to do is he's going to randomly put you in the groups. And when he clicks go to breakout rooms, you're going to get something that pops up on your screen saying join the room. We're going to give you about 10 minutes to do this. Now, if you don't get to all the questions, that's okay. What's important is to talk through this. Rooms 1 through 3, you are on scenario 1. Rooms 4 and 5, scenario 2. Now, any questions regarding the activity before we send you there?
Rebecca,
Yeah.
this is Carol. I'm going to be leaving the group. I'm at a hotel. I'm traveling to our state rehab council meeting. I'm in the hotel, and I just got checked into my room.
No problem. No problem.
So I will
No.
catch. I will catch. This has been recorded, so I can catch it. This is really good. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, you can catch it on our website.
Okay. Thank
Thank you.
you. Yeah. Thank you, Wayne.
You bet.
Okay, so Carol's going to pop out. So again, still going to have 5 groups. So if there aren't any questions, go ahead and open the rooms. And again, you're going to be in there about 10 minutes.
Just a second. With Carol gone, that made a 3-person room, so I'm moving one other person in there. It would have been a 2-person room. So, okay, here we go. I'm going to open them all.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, for those of you watching the recording, I'm going to pause the recording for the breakout room interaction. And then when folks come back from their breakout rooms, I will unpause it and you'll be able to hear their conversations. So we are coming back from breakout rooms for those of you who are watching this recording, and we will have a discussion. We want to have some time for you to be able to talk about what your group, what you shared, insights you had, things like that. So we want to start with rooms 1, 2, and 3. And your scenario was scenario number 1. And I'm going to read it just so everybody's on the same page with that. And then we'll have you just unmute and share some of the things regarding the questions. So your scenario was that your AIVRS program has noticed a high rate of client dropout between the time an individualized plan for employment is developed and the first 90 days of employment. The program doesn't know why, and the key question or the key word here is why this is happening and wants to improve client retention. So groups 1, 2, and 3, what were some of the things you talked about regarding that scenario?
In group one, we talked about surveying the participants or using an exit interview to try to identify why they're dropping out, like what additional barriers the consumer has to successfully completing the program, or if there's a number of check-ins that would be more appropriate to lead to their success. And we thought that it fell under the association rule mining.
Yeah, so excellent. So you're wanting to look at evaluation measures to be able to get some of that additional data. So excellent. Anybody else in groups 1, 2, or 3? What were some of your conversations around?
So I was in, I believe, room 3, and ours was the scenario 1. And we were looking at their IPE and if they were covering the barriers and of it, are we covering the barriers? Is IPE feasible? And maybe even look at what services they had in, I mean, um, I think Mr. Lee had addressed or said something about maybe the software, how does it generate and gather data? Are we consistent with communication, with them? And just things like that. And we were looking at clustering um, as our data mining technique.
Yeah. So you had quite a few things come up that you could actually look at. And I hear that Lee said, let's go into the data system if we've got software and let's pull some of that and start looking at it. And really what I hear you saying that was really powerful is let's look at the IPE and the services in there. And do we see a correlation of maybe they're too difficult to do, there's too much, or they aren't the right services, or and being able to connect that. So that's excellent. I was in a group with Ashley, but it wasn't Ashley. Do you want to unmute, tell everyone who you are? And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing what we talked about.
So I am Lati. I am her admin assistant. And what we talked about was the IEP and how if they can transition into if their services and how if it was related to their alcohol or any substance.
So we talked, and I'll just add a little bit. We talked about using classification and going into the data system and looking at the different disabilities, different impairments, and determining, is there a specific impairment that's connected to the dropout? Like after the IP is written, do we see a high percentage of, and this was just an example, of those with substance or alcohol abuse dropping out? And if we do, how then do we go back to the IPE and make sure the supports are there for someone with that particular impairment to make sure we're doing our best for that not to happen? So anybody else? Scenario 1.
In scenario 1, we discussed the employment outcomes with certain disabilities, and I guess all the variables we looked at, clustering, what was the other ones? Because some in some areas for those with physical disabilities, maybe the service area does not have the accommodations for them, so that's probably why they're not getting the employment and what the services they received. And under clustering, one mentioned the age.
Mhm.
We might have youth that maybe don't have the work experience, and older individuals may not have the computer experience. So, and then we looked at why individuals are dropping out. Same thing, in the cluster variables.
Yeah, so were you scenario 1 or 2, Gail?
I think we use scenario 2.
Okay, so let's transition into that because you had some really good points as you shared that. And so scenario 2 was your AIVRS program has a diverse client population. While overall employment outcomes are meeting federal goals, a recent internal review suggests that clients with certain disabilities or from specific tribal communities are not achieving the same level of success. The program wants to identify the factors contributing to these variables and develop targeted strategies to ensure equitable outcomes for all clients. And so what I heard you talking about, Gail, is that your group really talked about, are there, with physical impairment, are there things going on in the community that are keeping them? They don't have the accommodation to get those jobs. And, really looking at that and you use kind of all 3 of those techniques for data mining and looking at some of those things. So did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. How about somebody else in group breakout room 4 or 5? What else did you discuss regarding that scenario?
We would use the association and thank you, Wayne, for providing that additional. I was like, what does that mean? Like, I was like, what does it mean? What I think it means? It seems in scenario 2, I would say I'd use cluster and the association, but the cluster had already been done because we identified that certain disabilities and certain tribal communities are not achieving the same success. So the question is, are we providing them similar services? And if we are providing similar services and those clusters are not having success, where in the service tree do they drop off at? So we would use that data to determine where is the disconnect happening and why is this disconnect happening. And Rochelle and my team was talking about how sometimes, our participants go to school outside of their community and then they drop out because they want to come back to their community. So some communities are more tight-knit than others. And
Yeah.
so the success, so there could be like, hey, we're providing all these support for this community who has a culture of going out and coming back or going to school. And then another one that's more close-knit. And this is like the first person in ages to do this. So it's like, well, how can we ensure that this individual gets the training and gets the support that they need to be able to be self-sufficient and be successful and based off, and then I would probably go to the community, like look at the community, talk to the community and see what's necessary. Like, is it okay if I continue a little bit longer or do you want me to shut up?
Oh, no, keep going.
So like we have outlying villages. So I've spoken to the villages. We have people that want training, but the problem is they're very integrated with, they're interdependent upon each other, which is beautiful. And so
Yeah.
they may not be the parent, but they are watching children or they are doing this, or they are, like there's a bunch of different things. So on my end, because of the different like programs that I support, it's like, all right, let me bring the training to you. So
Yes.
just seeing what is best for each individual community, because not everything, because when we look at TVR that focus on coalitions that have multiple tribal entities associated with it, they all have their own distinct culture. And it's like, how can we need to be respectful of that. And even if it works for one culture, it doesn't for other. And I think even with that can help with bias training and stuff, because we're like, oh, this works, but yeah, for us, but not for somebody else, like another group. So that's, what my thoughts were.
So very powerful because, you know, and again, this is a hypothetical situation, but if you determine leaving the community is more stressful because of that interdependence, and you see that bringing training in can help them get to successful employment outcome and not have to leave the community, then that data mining has given you, you know, insight into this is how we improve those employment outcomes. So very powerful. Anybody else from breakout room 4 or 5 want to share? So really what our hope was in being able to, let me screen share here, being able to walk through this was to be able to just give you a little bit of a sense of how, you know, how this can work. And again, it was a very, you know, we couldn't cover everything in this webinar, but hopefully it gives you a sense of what you can do in terms of using that data to really expound on some things for your program. And so in conclusion, and really some next steps, is just really pointing out that data mining is a powerful tool for transforming the raw data into really something meaningful, you know, meaningful intelligence of what you can do with that data in your projects. It also empowers you in your program to not only report on what happened, but to then effectively influence your program outcomes by what you're learning. So the call to action, the next steps, really look at, can we assess our current data collection practices? Do we have a software system that allows us to do that? Second is consider maybe a pilot project to explore data mining on a specific question or a specific problem, like predicting outcomes for a particular participant group. You know, maybe you have a, you know, college, a tribal college near you that you could use. You know, you could go in and talk about students that might want to do a pilot project like that. And then also just invest in training or partnerships to build your data analysis capacity. That's really important. And again, we wear many hats. We have a million things on our plates, but this is really about sustaining our programs and using the data we've received from our communities to share the story of who we are and what we do. So with that, Wayne and I want to wrap up. Any final questions or comments from you all that we can try to answer?
Rebecca, on the top of gathering data, should I put up the webinar survey, the end of webinar survey now while people are asking questions?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Miles.
The survey is what helps us, you know, continue to provide webinars to you guys. So please make sure you take a moment and fill that out.
And remember that it scrolls down. There are 3 questions to it, I believe.
Yep.
And so in the sidebar,
There's 6 on this one.
You know, the big thing I want to remind everybody about this is that it's one of the only opportunities that AIVRS projects get to really show the stakeholders and our federal funders the impact that our projects have in our communities, and how culturally appropriate services can impact and improve our tribal members with disabilities lives, right? Like, the state hasn't been able to make that successful. All the other programs that come out and just are there don't ever have that same impact that you guys do.
and I really want to thank, you know, I want to thank Angie. Angie, you recorded your group, giving us the ability to really hear that interaction. So thank you for doing that and putting it in the chat.
And for those who may try to take advantage of the program, so if they're looking for like auto repair or something, it's good to follow along for a while before you give them those services. And or do you think because you know they have their job or something, do you think those type of services should be rendered as soon as possible?
Well, so I think there's a couple things with that, Vanessa. If someone comes to you and they already have a job,
Yeah,
you need to go through that eligibility process and really determine,
right.
are they eligible for services? Like, are there impediments? Do they require, go through those eligibility pieces? And then the
Yeah,
second part is if somebody's coming in and they want stuff, I just want stuff. And they're really pushing, when can I get my tires?
right.
When can I get my uniforms? When can I? It may be a healthy process to slow it down and do counseling and guidance a little bit more with them to determine, we're about an employment outcome. So let's talk through this. And those people who just want stuff are going to leave because they're going to be like, nope, I don't want to hang around here if you're not going to give me stuff. But your people that really want those life changes and to move to
Right.
employment outcome, they'll begin to show that because honestly, people come through the doors of tribal
Right.
VR and they're desperate. They've been turned away from everybody else. That a lot of times they come in and their first comments are, I need, and that's because they're desperate. But slowing the process down a little bit gives you opportunity to really be able to see those are there just for stuff and those that are there because they really want a life change.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I agree. I
So
agree with
hopefully
that.
that
And
helps.
sometimes that's why you see them
Hmm.
heading out the door.
Yeah, and again, you're a VR counselor, trust your gut.
Yeah,
That really is, a lot of VR counseling is if your gut is saying slow it down, slow it down. And also remember that comprehensive assessment, which
right.
I call the grade 8. Use
Mm-hmm.
that to really learn the story of someone. And if somebody's impatient and they don't want you to know their story, there are reasons for that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Rebecca.
Sure. Any other questions? Well,
Look
Wayne,
at that. We are 1 minute. I mean, this is awesome. I don't think I've ever been able to contain you to an on-time ending ever, because you just like to talk forever.
uh,
That's an ongoing joke with Rebecca and I. She's always telling me I get off track and I go rogue.
I tell him to land the plane, So we're going to land it right now.
Yeah,
Thank you
right
all
now.
so much for being here. It was a real pleasure. So thank you.
Thanks, everybody. And if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.